Dan, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here this morning. Looking forward to our conversation with Jason. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We're going to have a conversation till about 8:30, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. But before I start, though, with Jason, I thought I'd share a few facts with members of our audience. And if you, like me, you're certainly aware of DraftKings, but may not be intimately familiar with the industry. So I thought I'd just share with you a few important facts. So first, number one, Jason started DraftKings with two partners in 2012 and has built the company into the global leader of an extremely exciting industry. Two, the industry in which DraftKings operates, which is known as daily fantasy sports, or DFS, allows fans to enter daily and weekly sports contests and win prizes based on individual players' performances. Three, if you're thinking of your office fantasy football league, it works similarly but faster, is more diverse, and represents a serious business. Industry researchers estimate that players spent an estimated $3.26 billion on daily fantasy sports in 2016. Four, DraftKings' biggest contests offer cash prizes of $1 million or more. I guess I will have to be a customer soon. And this I found unbelievable. I didn't know this either. DraftKings platform hosts contests in a huge variety of areas, including Major League Baseball, the NBA, the Women's NBA, NFL, Canadian Football League, National Hockey League, PGA, and the European Tour Golf, NASCAR, Mixed Martial Arts, Major League Soccer, and the English Premier League. So you can bet on pretty much everything. Six, DraftKings has signed up nearly 8 million customers worldwide who collectively have submitted more than 600 million contest entries. Seven, and as Dan mentioned, the company is headquartered in Boston with offices in New York City, London, and Malta. It employs more than 350 people. And finally, DraftKings has raised more than $830 million from investors. So from nothing in 2012, 5 years later, Jason has built a significant company, and congratulations on that. So Jason, let me begin with a basic question. For people in the audience who might never have entered a DraftKings contest, can you just tell us how it works?
So I think, as you mentioned, it's very similar to the traditional leagues that people are used to playing with their friends and office coworkers. The way it works, though, is instead of it being for a whole season like those leagues are, it's for one day or one weekend for football. The way that the game would function is I would go on to the mobile app or website, and you figure out which contest you'd like to enter. You can enter more than one if you'd like. You can also play against your friends, so you could send a challenge to your friends or join a league that would have only your friends and people that you knew in it, and you could play contests there. Once you pick the contest and figure out who you want to play with, and as you mentioned, it could be anything from a one-on-one match to playing in tournaments with hundreds of thousands of people and huge prizes. Once you do that, you go and you pick your team. And the way that you pick your team is it's like you're the general manager of a real sports team. You have a salary cap. That salary cap is not real money. It's just for the purpose of the game. Each player has a salary based on how good they are, how good their matchup is. Tom Brady usually at the top of the quarterback list. And then once you draft the players that you want under that salary cap and submit it, there's a whole experience around the live game where you watch your scores update, you can see your name moving up and down the leaderboard. We have extension apps, including an app called DK Live, that allow you to get really deep into the play-by-play and visualizations of what's going on the field or in the arena. And that's really the most fun part of it. People like picking the team, but the actual experience of watching the games, that's the exciting part. And that's the reason why fantasy sports has been linked to so much deeper and more extensive consumption of sports content. It makes the games more exciting, so people want to watch them more. They want to watch them longer. They want to watch a more varied set of teams, not necessarily just their hometown favorite. We've even seen that about 50% of our customers have started to adopt a new sport that they were never a fan of before, specifically because they are playing on DraftKings.
Well, fantastic. And Jason, a follow-up to that. So what caused you back in 2012 to think that this would be an industry that would capture people's attention and again, grow so quickly?
So I was a big fantasy sports fan, and I became a fan and experienced the growth of it as it hit the internet in the late 90s, and as the sports leagues, particularly the NFL, really started to integrate it into all the content that they produced and understood that it was driving engagement and growth of their game. I witnessed all this, and I loved it. I knew it was a big market, and I understood the product well. And I was always amazed that no one had kind of figured out, a different way of doing it. So when my co-founder, Matt, one of my two co-founders, approached me and had this idea about shortening it up and making it more exciting that way and not making people feel like they had to commit to a whole season, which is tough, especially in sports like baseball and basketball that are long seasons. It just immediately resonated with me. I knew that it was going to be something big, and I was almost a little worried that because I was personally a fan that I was overvaluing it, but I knew there were tens of millions of fantasy sports players and that a very large chunk of them would be interested in something like this. And I also thought it could broaden the market, because some of the biggest hurdles to getting some of my friends to try fantasy sports is that commitment, feeling like they're not going to get, they're not going to like it, and now I'm committed to a whole season of it. It's much easier to get somebody to try something new if they can try it for a day, and if they don't like it, they don't have to play it again.
So back in 2012, in the early days, you weren't the big kid on the block, right? FanDuel your arch rival, had a significant head start on you. So how did you close and actually reverse that gap?
So when Matt first told me about this idea, and he still claims that he had no idea these other companies existed, I went to the internet and found that there were probably about a dozen others, maybe more at that point, doing it. By the time we launched, there were over 20. And I found FanDuel, I found DraftStreet, some of the other ones that had really kind of emerged as the leaders at that point. And the first instinct was, oh, that's too bad, other people thought of this first and they're ahead of us. But what I came to realize was that was actually really a good thing. You don't want to be trying to create and grow a market yourself. I think it's actually helpful to have others that are doing that, more capital coming in, more people kind of pushing each other, companies pushing each other, and overall just more marketing and more PR. And what we really wanted to do was to both kind of be a part of that overall growth, but to do it better. And we figured that the best places that were going to be the most important ones to differentiate were going to be on product, technology, and analytics. And really being able to use that analytics to optimize the product, really, to sharpen up the marketing, get great returns, be able to target customers well. And that was our background. We had been analytics and product tech people for many years in our careers, so we felt like even though we had never had experience in this industry, we knew it well as fans, and we had, we thought, the right DNA to build a tech company, an analytics-focused tech company. And then there was a lot of capital that it took also. I mean, as the market started to grow, and I really didn't anticipate this, but when you're in a fast-moving market, you have to react, and you have to just be honest with yourself about what's happening, and if you need to change strategy a little bit to do that, you have to do it. And so as the market started to take off, I realized that playing the long game alone of just being better on the tech and analytics side wasn't going to be enough. That good news is it's a hot industry and there's lots of capital coming into it. Bad news is that there's lots of capital coming into our competitors. Yeah. And so we had to raise a lot of money to keep up, and we were coming from behind. So we had to be better at it, and we had to be able to get better investors in and raise more money on better terms. And so that was a huge focus of mine for many years. I think the last 9-10 months is the longest stretch I've ever had since we started the company where I have not been focused on fundraising, and the only stretch in the last 2.5 years where I have not been focused on fundraising.
So Jason, you mentioned analytics and how important that has been to the growth of your industry, and I would be curious, what are the demographics of your customer base? Be interested for you to share that with us today.
So one of the things that's great and makes me feel really excited about the future of our platform is our customer base. And they're really the prototypical customers that I think a lot of companies are seeking right now. They're millennial, they're tech savvy, they tend to skew towards cord cutters. It's a very male audience. We're trying to build up more of a female audience. We're working on it, but it's a little tough when a lot of the people that play traditional fantasy are men already, so we're already fishing from a pond that's male oriented, but we're trying to grow the game on the female audience as well. Tend to be a little higher income, so skews upper income, and also tend to be people that are willing to spend money on entertainment and sports, and particularly as it relates to their fantasy and gaming entertainment.
Great. So on a different tact, DraftKings, like a lot of emerging technology companies, you've confronted some high-profile industry issues, regulatory issues, in a relatively short period of time. And I'd be curious, did the regulatory scrutiny that you encountered surprise you at first?
Yes. I mean, in retrospect, it makes sense. So, you always think you should have seen more of it coming, but it totally surprised me. I just wasn't really focused on it. I was in this intensely competitive market. Mm-hmm. We were focusing on this fast-growing, competitive battle that, at the time before the regulatory scrutiny started, we were growing like 5-6 times year over year. So, I mean, it was just tough to keep up with the scaling and trying to make sure that we, had tech, we had people, all those things. And, we had focused a little bit on it. We had started to put together, which is why we were able to handle it, some, lobbying efforts and things like that. But it was on a very modest scale, and it wasn't something I thought was going to be such an intense focus. I thought it was going to be, just something that we kind of slowly ramped up investment in over time. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being quite the opposite. We literally heard nothing from regulators, and it's not like we weren't out there. I mean, we were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing, and even before that 2015 NFL season, we had already spent probably around 70-80 million in the last few years on marketing, collectively with our competitors in an industry, hundreds of millions. Tons of PR about us. We had taken in investments from 3 sports leagues, Major League Baseball, the NHL, Major League Soccer, many different sports owners, premium venture capital firms. So, we were out there, and there were a lot of, I think, reasons that, I think the ultimate regulatory scrutiny came the way it did, but it was surprising. And the other thing I would mention, too, is that the fantasy products that had been out there before, it was season-long ones, so on like CBS, ESPN, Yahoo, they all had money products, too. They all had products that you could pay to enter and for prizes. So it never really made sense to me that they started to distinguish that from the daily game, because the whole legal distinction was supposed to be around, is this a game of skill or not? And I think it was clearly a skill-based. But what I realized was that that's really not what mattered. What mattered was this was a high-profile thing due to a lot of the increasing attention. And, there were some things that people were concerned about that, ended up being solved through regulation. And sometimes that's the way they go about it. So, you have to cooperate. You can't fight the government on that kind of stuff. I think we actually stood out in the way we approached it. And, at the time when all this is going on, you're trying to think about, a million different critical decisions in one day and somehow make all the right ones. And, one of the many decisions we had to make was, how do we approach this? Do we come out swinging and leverage the grassroots of our customer base to go after legislators, basically follow the Uber playbook? Yeah. Or do we do something a little bit different and cooperate? And we decided to do the second. The latter, I think, was the best choice for us, and it ended up working out really well. We were able to get 18 bills passed in states over the last couple of years, and now we're regulated by, I think almost half of the population in the country.
Oh, okay. And I just want to stay on that front for a moment. So in 2016, our Attorney General implemented consumer protection regulations, and they covered things like minors can't, participate, ensuring fair gameplay. They prohibit contests on college sports. They spelled out marketing practices. So am I right? You were quick to embrace these regulations here in Massachusetts. And I guess as a follow-up, did they change your business model at all?
So it was a pretty collaborative process. There were a few things that made it into the end that we weren't huge fans of, such as, every other state, the minimum age is 18, and in Massachusetts, it's the only state in the country where it's 21. So that was an example of something that kind of didn't make sense, that you can do anything besides drinking, but pretty much anything else, but you can't play fantasy sports and drink. Kind of feels like a little bit of a weird thing. But, mostly I thought it was fair. I thought the process was collaborative. It's also at a time when we were getting attacked in a much more severe way by New York. So having a good counter narrative of there's other ways to solve people's concerns was a very good thing for the company. And we ended up, using the regulations that the Massachusetts Attorney General did as the basis for the legislation that was getting passed around the country. So, she kind of created it, I think, without any guidepost, and it was good enough that 90+% of it made it into the other states' legislation. So
were we a model for many of the other states?
The model.
The
yeah,
model.
yeah. This was the model, and it was originally done through the AG because and I'm learning all this, of course, for the first time, drinking from a fire hose while this is going on. I'm like, why didn't the New York AG do the same thing? Feels like that would have been more popular with people to not ban it, to regulate it. And I find out that New York AG can't do that the Massachusetts Attorney General actually has specific powers that almost no other Attorney General in the state, in the country has, State Attorney General, to issue regulations, that most regulations have to be done through legislation, and that the New York AG maybe would have done that if he could have. So it ended up working out well that we were here, that she could do that, and that she ran a very thoughtful process, and I think came out with a pretty good framework.
Well, that's great to hear. We've had the AG here speaking to us several times over the last few years, so it's great to hear. So again, staying in that same area of conversation, so a short while ago, a commission here in Massachusetts recommended that our legislature enact a law that would label DFS as gambling and give the Massachusetts Gaming Commission oversight of the industry. I can guess what you think about that, but I'd love to hear it from you.
I think we'll continue to work with them on the way that they've kind of gone about their analysis, and I think there's some things that maybe were missed that would change a bit of that. But I think that's part of the process. There's a lot of steps along the way before laws get passed, and different opinions and arguments are put out there, and that's fine. I think that's part of the process, and we're just focusing on continuing to educate lawmakers and make sure that we get the right facts out there before final decisions are made.
Yeah. And I'm told that under federal law, you're actually exempt. Fantasy sports are actually exempt, right? And so.
Yeah. Well, all 18 states, as well as federal law, define fantasy sports as separate from gambling. And the other thing that I realized as I went through this whole process is that there's legal definitions of things, and then there's kind of like what an individual might colloquially think of something. And so there's a lot of this debate around like, is it or isn't gambling, and what I call gambling, what you do. And we were, unfortunately, for the most people, we knew and understood the legal aspect of it a lot better, and I think a lot of people just sort of looked at it as like, oh, it's gambling or it's not. But that's really not what mattered. What mattered wasn't the word gambling. What mattered was it skill-based or chance-based? That was how the law distinguished it, and the law could have just as easily called them both gambling, but said I'm going to treat skill-based gambling this way and chance-based gambling that way. And so at the end of the day, I don't think that matters, other than the fact that it has associations for people, and that I think it does in the law define it that way. But we were really focused on making sure that the way that it was treated was consistent with other states, and the other states, the 18 states, as well as the federal government, define it as skill-based and separate from chance-based gambling.
And what makes it skill-based is because as a customer, I'm picking the individual players and putting the team together. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you could, exactly. So the reason it's skill-based is that you are playing against other people, and the way that you play the game is not just random. You don't just, close your eyes and pick. You do research. You learn about the players and look at statistics, and the people who are good at it win consistently. So there's data also to back up the skill basis. And
as I mentioned earlier, you can participate in a whole variety of sports. What's the most popular?
Well, it's certainly the most popular is football. No surprise there. But because football is only once a week, we actually end up making a little bit more money in baseball and basketball than we do in football. Pretty similar, though, between those three, and those three definitely stand out. And the other one that I think from like a number of participants' perspective has been really surprising for us has been golf, particularly around the majors. We get great results in terms of participation on that.
That's interesting. And is Tom Brady really the most popular NFL player?
Yeah, well, certainly at quarterback he is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very popular. I mean, he's always the highest priced guy on our site because he, we have to, otherwise too many people will pick him.
Yeah.
You don't want everybody with Brady, then it's not fun. You're like, wait, Brady scored, but everybody else has him too. So it doesn't really make a good game. You want it where it's a good mix of players on different rosters.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Much as we would all love to pick Tom Brady.
So I have a question about the merger agreement that was pending with FanDuel. Are you able to comment on that? Obviously it didn't happen, and there were some regulatory issues around that, and I wonder if you can share what you can with us
Sure.
this morning.
Specifically to the reason it didn't go through, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, pretty simple. We went through a process with the FTC, and they decided that they wanted to try to block it, and for different reasons, it didn't make sense for us to continue to pursue it. And on the other side of the table, the company we were going to merge with, FanDuel, wasn't really keen on pursuing it either. So we decided to just abandon it and not take it to court. A lot had changed in the time since we signed the deal. So, we originally had contemplated the deal as more of a merger of equals, but between the time when we signed it and the time when we ultimately abandoned it, we gained considerable market share. We're about a little more than twice as large as them now.
What would you attribute that to?
Well, we were already gaining market share for the years going into it. I mean, the way that we got to about evenly sized, because as you mentioned earlier, they had a big head start, was by growing faster than them and catching up. And the underlying reasons why were we had a better mousetrap. We had a product that monetized, that retained better, had stickier customers, more loyal customers. We had a bigger a richer variety of games and sports, so people had more things to play and didn't have any reason to go elsewhere versus, I think some of their customers couldn't find what they wanted and had to come to us. And we were able to acquire and convert new customers in a more efficient manner as well. So really across the funnel, we were doing a better job, and still takes time to come back on somebody. You can't, overnight, but as time went on, those trends just continued. And because it's a very liquidity-driven product and very network effect-driven product, as you start to emerge as the leader, which we were, I think it just sort of builds upon itself, and you just get more and more momentum, and that seems to be what's happened.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I'm told, Jason, that DraftKings, you have the industry's most comprehensive compliance and game integrity programs, which go far beyond what state regulations require. So can you talk a little about that, why you do that, and specifically what steps you've taken?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot, it's interesting because I think a lot of times, regulators are always the answer, and people believe that regulations are the only way to keep companies honest, but most companies want their industry to have a good reputation, want their customers to trust them, want to feel like the product is fair and they're getting what they are paying for. So those things are all important to us too. And I think because the regulations that the AG gave were pretty thoughtful and didn't overreach, there was still a lot of room for us to say, well, what can we do to make our customers even more loyal, make them trust us and feel even better about us, and also just as stewards of the industry, as leaders of the industry, to try to rebuild a bit of the reputation that I think was tarnished by some of the misleading media reports, particularly from the New York Times, that have been out there. And we thought that was the right thing to do. It was maybe a short-term trade-off in some cases, like for example, we did a lot of things to limit the amount that the really good players could, who were spending a lot of money, could do to play against and win against the more casual players. And they complained about that, and of course, because they didn't win as much money. And in the short term, it was less revenue for us because we were making revenue off those games. But I think over the long term, that's what retains customers, and you have to reinvest in your customer, and you have to invest in your brand. If you don't, you may get short-term results, but you won't get long-term results, not as a consumer company.
And Jason, one last question before we open it up. What's the future? What's next? Where do you see DraftKings going?
So a lot of exciting things, I think, on the horizon. So what technology has done, and then mobile for gaming and for media, is really just, it's incredible. And we've only sort of reached the tip of the iceberg. I think you're going to see a convergence of media and gaming. I also think that this sort of media landscape where all the content is just scattered around different places, and you have to have a bunch of different services, or you have to sort through 800 cable channels to find what you're looking for. It's not necessary anymore. Now with technology, you can get the customer what they want in a seamless fashion, even if it's coming from different owners in different places. So what we really feel is going to happen is that the customer and what the customer demands, yes, sometimes it takes time, but that's where the world goes. And if you try to figure out, how you're going to change the world, usually that doesn't work. But if you figure out where the world's going and you can figure out a way to play a role there and get there first, I think that that's the smarter strategy. And our belief is that the world's going towards this convergence of media and gaming. We think that the U.S. is going to open up in terms of gaming and sports betting and other products that people want. It just seems like there's a lot of momentum there, and there's going to be a lot more acceptance of it. I think mobile and digital are the ways to actually solve problems like tracking integrity of the game and protections. Before, it was hard when it was done in a way that was a lot less trackable, pre-having all this type of technology and data. And I think that on the other side, the media side, you're going to see people say, I don't want to have to go into a bunch of different apps to do this, and I don't really care. It's your problem to solve rights holders if you've divided this pie up in the way you have. So what we've tried to do is position ourselves as a platform, partner with companies that own these types of rights and say, look, we can help you in the world where you're trying to grow your subscriptions, your direct-to-consumer business, because everyone in the media world is trying to do that right now. We can help you. We have the customers you want. We know exactly what they're interested in, and we have the data to target them. And we already have their wallet, too. We have their credit card. So rather than making them go download something else and fill out their name and put in their credit card, I can click a button, just like Amazon with one-click checkout, and I can be watching a game or buying a jersey. That Tom Brady jersey that I wanted can be on its way to my house already with one click of a button. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from us or not. I can pass that information, and we can integrate with companies that way. So that's really the direction I think everything's going. And platforms like ours are going to be the future, where our really only thing of value is that we own the customer and the data and the technology. But as far as what products are sold and how ultimately that makes its way to the customer, that's not as important to us. And I think that's the direction things are going in, more of like a platform and data direction.